Hello, Grammar 2 students. This week we are going to work on the complex noun phrase. The good news is you know quite a lot about the noun phrase, I'm sure. Let's briefly talk about the possibilities in terms of pre-modifiers. We know a phrase, in this case within the noun phrase you have a head, which is a noun, and you may find pre-modifiers and post-modifiers. Within pre-modifiers, you probably remember that you have determiners as characteristic pre-modifiers of the head noun. And within determiners, central determiners, which comprise articles, demonstratives, possessives, and quantifiers. We have predeterminers, like all, both, and half, and post-determiners, which correspond to numerals and quantifiers. Of course, it is also possible to find a noun phrase as a pre-modifier, okay? A noun phrase pre-modifying the head noun. And you can talk about, for example, a history book, all right? Or even a longer noun phrase like medieval history book, where medieval history would be the noun phrase pre-modifying the head noun book. Of course, an adjectival phrase. And then we have the possibility of finding an ing form as a pre-modifier of the noun. It could either be a present participle or a gerund. Maybe you have heard about the test. Remember that the gerund is nominal in nature. And that is why when you have an ing form, such as, I don't know, walking stick, there you know that you're talking about a stick for walking, all right? You see, it is a nominal. So that would be a gerund, yeah, same as a fishing rod. If it is a present participle, it is more adjectival or adverbial in nature, and in that case you can paraphrase using a relative clause. For example, if you say she's a dancing queen, yeah, she's a queen who is dancing. I don't like my example. Let me think of another. Well, dancing waters, that's a typical one, okay? Those are waters that dance. Okay. Now, most of the complexity of the noun phrase comes in post-modification. There are many possibilities in terms of what you can find after the head noun within the noun phrase. Look at this. Relative clauses, remember, they are post-modifiers of head nouns. Prepositional phrases, adjectival phrases, present participial clauses, past participial clauses, infinitival clauses, adverbial phrases, and noun clauses. Okay, let's see. Let's think of some examples. A relative clause. You could talk about the book which I bought was quite expensive. It could be a prepositional phrase like the book on the desk is not mine. Or an adjectival phrase, because we always think of the adjectival phrase as a pre-modifier, because in most cases adjectives come before before nouns, but sometimes you may find an adjectival phrase in post-modification. For example, you could talk about the stars visible at night look beautiful, okay? Visible at night That would be an adjectival phrase, okay? And you see that in this case, it is quite long, and that's why it appears as a post modifier. It is also possible to have, we said, the present participial clause, and you could say the students are sitting at the back are doing an exercise. Or a past participial clause, like the treasure found in the castle is at the National Museum, okay? An adverbial phrase, I could talk about all the students here are intelligent. And a noun clause, which is in fact not a post modifier, but a complement. You will find also in some books that it is called a noun clause in apposition, all right? Or noun complement. This is sort of a new maybe. We're going to focus on that a little bit later. Now, when we talk about modifiers, we should think about the notion of restrictiveness. We have already talked about restrictive and non-restrictive in relation to the relative clauses, okay? But this, in fact, applies to other post modifiers, okay? We could use the notion of restrictive and non-restrictive in relation to a prepositional phrase post modifier, for example. Let's read the definition for a restrictive modifier. In that case, the head is only identifiable through the modifications applied. More prosodic emphasis than the head. In the case of non-restrictive modifiers, they appear unstressed in pre-head position, and they are parenthetic in post position. What do we mean? Remember that we illustrated this by means of relative clauses. And we said that if you say, the woman who is wearing the yellow sweater is my mom, okay? Imagine we are looking at a picture. So in order to understand which woman I'm talking about, we need that restrictive relative clause, okay? There are several women in the picture, but I'm talking about the woman who's wearing the yellow sweater, okay? That woman is my mom. Now, imagine you know my mom well, and I show you a picture, okay, and I can tell you, oh, my mother, who is wearing a yellow sweater, looks very happy in this picture. You see that non-restrictive relative clause is not necessary for you to know which my mom is, because you know her well. Okay, but as my examples, once again, used relative clauses, but we could talk about if you say the house on the hill is very old, that on the hill is helping you identify which house I'm talking about. But you could also say something like my mother in tears decided to leave, okay? In tears would be non-restrictive modification. Okay, let's move on. Oops, am I right? Yes. Apart from thinking about restrictive and non-restrictive modification, when dealing with post modifiers, we should also think in terms of the degrees of explicitness. Look at these examples. I could use a relative clause as post modifier and say, the man who is standing at the back looks tired. Who is standing at the back is a restrictive relative clause. But I could also say, the man standing at the back. And in that case, this is a non-finite clause. It is a present participial clause. Present participial clause, okay? And I could even say the man at the back looks tired and use a prepositional phrase. But you can see that they have different degrees of explicitness in the sense that here we know that he's standing there now. We have the verb in the present tense, and we know he's standing. Here we don't know whether he was standing or is standing, and here we really don't know whether he's standing or doing what at the back, okay? So we have different degrees of explicitness. Now, if we concentrate on relative clauses, we know that the word that we find at the beginning of the relative clause is typically, or could be a relative pronoun, who, which, whom, that, or zero, zero only in the case of restrictive relative clauses. Okay? We may have a relative determiner, only one, whose, and we may find relative adverbs when, where, and why. And before going on, I would just like you to think about whom. Whom is not so common as the others. When do we use whom? Well, we have to think of whom as the objective form of who. Wow, what does it mean? It means that we use whom when the word performs the function of object or when it performs the function of object to a preposition. Let's see. I could say, the man whom I love is not here. Whom I love is a restrictive relative clause. And I'm using whom because it is the object within the relative clause. What does it mean? It means that the relative clause would be I love whom, okay? Of course, it is quite a formal word, and most probably I would say the man who I love, or the man that I love, or directly the man I love. So it means I could use who instead of whom in this case, or that, or even the zero relative pronoun. When can we use the zero relative pronoun? Well, when that pronoun is not performing the function of subject within the relative clause. All right? If you talk about the woman who visited me yesterday, you cannot omit that who, because who is the subject of the relative clause who visited me yesterday. So, when do we use whom? Well, I said when it is an object or when it is the object to a preposition. For example, the girl I bought this book for, the girl whom I bought this book for is ill. You see, I'm using whom because it is the object to the preposition for. But it is formal. And in fact, my first, when I was providing the example, my first option was not whom. Most probably we would go for the girl who I bought the book for, or that I bought the book for, or rather I bought the book for. So again, it is an option. I mean, you have other alternatives. So when is it impossible to avoid? When you have the preposition at the beginning of the clause. So if you say, the girl for whom I bought the book is ill, there is no way out, okay? For whom, to whom, with whom. In those cases, that is immediately after, if it comes immediately after the preposition, you need the objective form of the relative pronoun. Okay. The other word that might be a little bit confusing is whose. Remember, it is a determiner, and it is related to possession. What you have to remember is that whose will always be the pre-modifier of a noun. That is, you need whose plus noun. You can talk about the woman whose daughter won the contest is happy, okay? Whose daughter. Okay, whose house, whose life. It is whose will always be the pre-modifier of a noun within the relative clause. Okay, and then, well, you know, relative adverbs like when, related to time, where, to places, and why. Basically, I would say the only possible noun will be the reason why. Okay. I want to know the reason why he left so early. Okay, let's move on now to, remember I said there is the possibility of finding a noun clause as a noun complement. And sometimes you may have problems identifying which is which. So let's compare some examples. Here you have, I want you to read, I don't want to read them because the reading is quite revealing. Okay. Of course, in all these examples, one is a relative clause and the other one is a noun clause. What about the first pair, which is the relative clause? The first one, the discovery that he had made shocked his friends. Here you have an example of a restrictive relative clause. Now, when we talk about a noun complement, the noun complement is somehow explaining which the discovery is. So the discovery that he had made a mistake shocked his friends. You see, the discovery was that he had made a mistake. That's why we say it is a complement, okay? You see that they may be that it may be difficult because, well, in this case, for example, you have that at the beginning, you have almost the same words, but the structure is different. Look at these two, at the following pair. He had the knowledge that everything was lost. He had the knowledge that he had acquired as a child. In one of the cases, we have a restrictive relative clause. In which one? Yes. The second one is an example of a relative clause. And the first one, the knowledge was that everything was lost, is a noun clause. In the third example, a message that he will be late arrived early in the morning, or I have already received the message that he sent, which is the relative here. Yes, the relative is the second one, okay? The message that he sent. In the first case, you have that he would be late. That was precisely the message, okay? Now, how can we tell one from the other? Let's compare some points. Well, first of all, you may you have that in both. You may have that, but in the case of a relative clause, you have a relative pronoun which is referential and which has a function within clause structure. The that, which you will find within a noun clause, you know, is a subordinating conjunction, which means it is non-referential and it has no function within clause structure. Now we'll go back to the examples to check this. Now, you can find a relative clause with almost any noun. Now, in order to use, the noun clause as a complement is only used with some nouns, with a few nouns which we may call factual nouns. Factual nouns because the main member of the group is the fact. The fact that you're here makes me happy. So let's see if this is true. The discovery that he had made shocked his friends. In the case of the relative, we have this relative pronoun here, and which is the function within the clause. He had made that, the direct object. And if you see, you could also replace it by which. The discovery which he had made shocked his friends. Now, if we look at the noun clause, you will see that this that is a pure subordinating conjunction, okay? He had made a mistake. You have the object here, okay? The structure is complete. That performs no function within. It is a subordinating conjunction, okay? And you see that, well, we said within the group, let's say, of factual nouns, we have fact, but we'll say the discovery, the knowledge. Here we have the message, the idea, the notion, the belief, okay, you need this kind of factual nouns. Okay, up to now we have, well, in fact, I have them talking. So now it is time for you to work a little bit. I would like you to pause the video here and try to identify all the noun phrases in this short extract and see whether you can identify all the elements within those noun phrases. So when you finish, we will discuss. Okay, let's discuss. Which is the first noun phrase here? The subject of the first sentence is instructors attempting new teaching methods, which is the head, instructors. How many pose modifiers? Only one, attempting new teaching methods. This is an example of a present participial clause as pose modifier. Very good. Then, if you look at the object within the first sentence, you get, they may have, concerns that students will resist non-traditional teaching methods, which is the head. Concerns is the head noun. How many pose modifiers? Well, in fact, it's not a pose modifier, but what do we find after this head? A noun clause as a noun complement. That students will resist non-traditional teaching methods. Now, if we go inside, okay? If you take just this noun phrase, new teaching methods, what about teaching? Is it a gerund or a present participle? What do you think? Yes, it is a gerund. It is nominal. Okay, we'll go on. The authors, this is not complex. You just have the determiner. Provide, and the object here is an overview of research characterizing the nature of student resistance and exploring its origins. This is a a complex noun phrase, isn't it? The head is overview. You have the article, okay, the indefinite article. And what about pose modification? How many pose modifiers have you identified here? Do you think you have one? You have two? You have three? How many have you marked? Only one. You have a long prepositional phrase. And within this prepositional phrase, you have the preposition. And the object to that preposition, once again, is a very, very long noun phrase. Research is the head. What about pose modification? The rest is a pose modifier, and which is the category. Present participial clause. In fact, we have two present participial clauses, okay, which are coordinated by means of and. So it is research, characterizing the nature of student resistance, which is the first present participial clause as pose modifier, okay? And inside, you have the nature of student resistance, okay? Here you have an example of a noun, noun phrase pre-modifying the head noun. Okay, and then you have the second present participial clause exploring its origins, okay? Inside, of course, you will have this short noun phrase. Okay, additionally, we have just the pronoun here. They provide, and the object of this verb is, potential strategies for avoiding or addressing resistance. Shall I go on or stop? What do you think? Chuk, 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 chuk. I should stop here. So they provide, the authors provide potential strategies for avoiding or addressing resistance. We have a pre-modifier, an adjective, the head noun strategies, and a prepositional phrase as pose modifier for avoiding or addressing resistance. And you have the preposition. The object of the preposition is a gerundial clause, okay, which has two gerunds which are coordinated by means of or. Okay, they provide these strategies and pose, the object to the verb poses, questions about resistance that may be ripe for research study. Okay, the head here is questions. How many pose modifiers do I have? That is the key question here. One or two? Yes, two. Why? Because we have questions about resistance. First pose modifier is a prepositional phrase, and the second one is a restrictive relative clause. They pose questions that may be ripe for research study. Be careful because, I mean, which is the question you ask yourselves in order to decide whether you have one or two pose modifiers. Well, you should decide whether this relative is related to resistance or to questions. And in this case, it is clearly linked to questions for research study, okay? Well, I hope you have done well. I will upload a text for you to practice, and we will discuss that in our Zoom meeting next Thursday. Okay, see you then.